Well, jeepers! You're listening to Smash or Pass.
Hello everyone, welcome back to another interview on the JayBee and Milly channel. I am JB and joining me is Milly.
Hi.
And the special guest who'll be interviewing today is Mr. Mark Kirkland. Thank you so much for joining today.
You're welcome.
So I'm really looking forward to getting into your career, and I want to paint a picture from the beginning. And so I was looking at IMDb and I could see that you started your career as a layout artist and story director in 1978. But before that, what kind of put you on the path to work in, television and animation?
Well, at a young age, I liked to draw, and that goes all the way back to my childhood. And my father is an internationally renowned. He was an internationally renowned photographer, and so he was in the visual world, and he worked a lot in entertainment. But even as a child, we would sit together. I'm the oldest of three kids. My dad was only 22 years older than me. And so we would sit and draw together at a young age. And that was, that was really the beginning. And then following along, I did enjoy drawing in school. I was kind of a daydreamer and not so good in academics, but I could be found drawing and doodling all the time. So so when it came time to kind of get into a career, I felt very limited in a funny way. There wasn't a lot I wanted to do. There wasn't a lot I liked to do, but drawing seemed good. And I checked out a little bit illustration, even comic book artist. I considered maybe that's for me. But in the end, it was animation, and I was lucky and to have supportive parents. And I was lucky that my dad, particularly, encouraged me to go into animation. He thought it was an interesting career. So I got to go to Cal Arts at a very young age. I was 17 when I went, and I had a portfolio. And the head of the department, Jules Engel, today it's called experimental animation. Back then we called it film graphics. And he ran that department, but he was an ex Disney story artist and an artist. And he worked at the famous studio UPA on projects like Mr. Magoo and Madeline and Gerald McBoing Boing. So he had a rich history of animation, and I was lucky to go there. And along the way, I met a lot of the old Disney veterans who were coming up and running classes and instructing us, and that gave me an advantage, that training. And when I was 20 years old, I got a job at Hanna-Barbera in the layout department, and I assisted one of those guys, Morris Golub, who was he was a fantastic animal draftsman. He had worked on the movie Bambi for Disney, but he was their primo animal artist, and he could do any layouts, any kind of art for Hanna-Barbera. He did it all, and I assisted him and kind of wanted to emulate him. So, but that was how I got my foot in the door at Hanna-Barbera, which ultimately meant Scooby Doo and other, all their projects, I worked on everything they had. So, yeah.
Oh, wow, that sounds fascinating. And so, can I ask, in relation to, going into animation and that kind of thing, like you say, you always enjoyed drawing, but was there any particular artists or TV shows that made you want to go down the animation route?
Well, I certainly enjoyed watching The Wonderful World of Color. I thought the Disney animation, the quality, I thought was beautiful, and it is. And as a child, I did watch Hanna-Barbera TV shows. The Flintstones I liked, But I watched all the Saturday morning kids, including Scooby Doo at my age. You know, they were on when I was a kid, and but illustrators, Maurice Sendak. I enjoyed his drawings, his fantasy. You know, Night Kitchen was a wonderful you know, his illustrations I really enjoyed. There were fine artists as a kid. My mom likes to tell the story that she took my sisters and I to a library, and my sisters bought piles of books of you know, books about horses and things like that. And she said I came out with one book, but it was on old masters' drawings. And she said it was the biographies. And she said I read them all, except for there was one artist I didn't like, so I didn't read his biography. But so I guess I did enjoy even looking at like Leonardo da Vinci. As a kid, I loved the inventive stuff he did, but I liked how he presented it with his drawings. Beautiful drawings. Yeah. I
That's
still
so
like those.
cool.
I still like them. Yeah.
Wow, that is incredible. I can't like imagine having that type of almost intuition to what you wanted to do from such a young age. Because I know that when I was growing up, one minute I wanted to be an archaeologist because of Indiana Jones, and then I wanted to be a Ghostbuster. But then for you to like love the art and the craft of, you know, being an artist, and then to go to work at Hanna-Barbera at the age of 20 is just, I couldn't even imagine that. So when you did get to work at Hanna-Barbera, do you remember how the process was like for getting hired on, and what was the first couple of things that you really learned there?
You know, that kind of job today as well, you're hired based on your skills. I had come from, I had an okay, I guess, recommendation by my mentor, Mo Golub, who was well respected. He was one of the top artists there. They must have known that, but they looked at my portfolio and made a decision. They said, okay. And by the way, they started me out at the lowest level apprentice that I could get, but I was lucky to get in there. And I learned a lot fast. And one thing that may happen to anybody getting into a career is you envision what it's going to be like and you prepare for that. And once you're there, you go, it's not like I thought it was going to be. You know, things are different. And the skill set I was learning, gee, I have to learn a whole bunch of different things. And one of the early things that I did work with the guy who originally drew and designed Scooby Doo was Iwo Takamoto. And he was the creative vice president of the company. And so he was the top, well, I have to say the top artist in the company might have been Joe Barbera, you know, of Hanna-Barbera. But right under him was Iwo Takamoto. And, you know, I remember the first thing Iwo told me, like almost day one, he said, you're not in art school anymore. And we're not making art. This is the entertainment business. So that was the first thing he made it known to me, is our goal is to do entertainment. Now you have to have a drawing facility to draw what is needed to do the entertainment. But he wanted that to be clear, that the decisions made were to ultimately create something entertaining. So
That's a really good philosophy that was kind of like it had there, because of course, you know, if it was made to entertain, it absolutely succeeded in all that it set out to do across generations as well. Like, it kind of baffles me to imagine that so many people, you know, have grown up on a version of Scooby Doo, a version of, I guess, a lot of the Hanna-Barbera things. But as you said, before working at Hanna-Barbera, you like stuff like Scooby Doo and the Flintstones, and then going to work on some of the more revamped and revived series like the new Fred and Barney show. Was there any kind of additional pressure there from your end being part of that process of introducing those shows to a new generation?
When you work for Hanna-Barbera in the TV department, which was largely what they were, you know, we had to produce so much volume that that you know, certainly they wanted good draftsmanship and all that, but the numbers of drawings and scenes we had to produce was staggering, and I had to learn how to pace myself and to do to do that job. So it was more get it done was the initial thing. So I was continuing to take my drawing classes at our union, and my instructor, Mo Golub, was the guy I worked for. He was our drawing instructor for the union. So I continued to take serious drawing classes, and I even taught a layout class, which is surprising at that age. But basically, the pressure was do a nice job, but my supervisors thought I did a nice job. You know, and I went from show to show to show, episode to episode, and so I did the hero shows. I did the Super Friends. I worked with I worked for Doug Wildey on the Godzilla show, and all these shows are different styles. So they used to call it, the old guys like Mo called it, we have the straight stuff, and that would be all the superhero stuff. And then we have the broad stuff, and that was all the comedy, which was include Fred and Barney and the Flintstones, and there was the comedy, and then there was the straight. Scooby Doo kind of fell in the middle because it was supposedly adventure, but with comedy, and you needed to be able to draw well and think cinematically and stage. We had storyboards given to us that were approved, and we had to lay them out full size. You know, my drawings were about that big, and they were done on a disc like this. The same kind of, this is an old, very old disc, but I was sitting at something like that, as we all were, and I was supposed to draw 6 scenes a day, and full size, setting them up for the animators, and that included the background rough, or actually a background cleanup, any vehicles that were in the scene, and character poses that told the story. And we were going off of storyboards that, you know, each panel of the storyboard was a little tiny drawing like that big. Well, when you got the storyboard, a lot of times it needed plussing up, we called it. It needed to be improved. And if you were a good layout artist with a good sense of cinema, a good sense of perspective, a good sense of art direction, you could make it a better shot. And that was always welcomed. Like, can you add art direction? Can you add a better camera angle? And yet it had to be, you wanted to do it so it was simple for the animators. They too were under so much volume pressure. So it really was about, TV was economy animation. That really was what Hanna-Barbera was like at the time. And it wasn't frills, and it wasn't like Disney, which you would get an assignment and spend. I'm not saying that the Disney artists weren't fast; they could be, but they didn't. They were given on those features like a long period of time to gestate and warm up to their characters and help develop things and stuff. And they were under pressure too. But Hanna-Barbera was, I call it, we were like short order cooks, you know, in the kitchen, in a diner. That's what it felt like. We couldn't, we couldn't really finesse things too much. We had to do a lot. But that's a training also. That is an artistic training of getting stuff out, getting it being productive. And one of my bosses, I noticed you interviewed Bob Singer.
Oh yeah.
And I remember Bob very early on. I worked on a presentation my first week with Bob. We were doing something for EWO and for JayBarbera, and we had to design some characters. And I remember Bob helping me. I mean, it was literally my first couple of days, and he did these things, and he showed me. He says, "See, you can do good work, and you can do it fast." That was like something he said. So.
Oh, well, it certainly sounds like there was a lot, that certainly we know there's a lot that you worked on that we absolutely, adore, but also that you yourself, seem to have some really fond memories from being with Hanna-Barbera. And is there kind of anything that stands out particularly to you as kind of one of your most memorable moments from working there?
Well, a collective, how the older generation animators welcomed a young guy like me, took me under their wing. We all had fun together. I mean, they all did that. And I liked hearing the stories. You'd see a guy walking down the hall and know he worked on Snow White. Another guy worked on Pinocchio. Another guy worked on Fantasia. Another guy worked on Tom and Jerry. I mean, they were all there. I got to work with Tex Avery a little bit. I got to talk with Tex Avery, and I showed him a layout which he liked, and then he gave me a bit of staging advice. He said, if you are going to stage, and I think as a director, which primarily I've become, I always think back to Tex Avery telling me, if you're going to stage somebody lighting a cigar, don't do it straight into camera. Turn it on the side so it reads like a profile. Get that silhouette value in your pose. And that was Tex Avery telling me that. And I think, wow, one day I was walking down the hall, and another guy who knew me and was escorting Mel Blanc, the legendary Mel Blanc, down the hall. And he introduced me to Mel Blanc. He's one of our young artists, Mark Kirkland. And Mel Blanc was just so happy to meet me. And and it was like we were meeting each other as we're both professionals. And I'm going, this is Mel Blanc. He's a legend, So that collectively, all of those guys, and that includes Bill Hanna and JayBarbera. They were always super sweet when I worked with them. And those are my fond memories of how nice people were. And I'm still friends with Floyd Norman. If you know Floyd Norman, look him up. And I sat in a cubicle with Floyd Norman, and I sat under what we called the wall of shame. It was a joke wall. We called it that, but there were jokes about the company. And so I would watch Floyd Norman come up with these jokes, and they just poured out of him. The humor poured out of Floyd. And he was a great artist. He still is a great artist. And people can follow him on Facebook and look at the beautiful artwork he continues to make. So that was just really fun. Bob Singer, wonderful artist. So there were a lot of really talented people who were working there. So
That's incredible. I mean, so many people that have worked, at Hanna-Barbera for Hanna-Barbera, especially in the building itself, always speak about like that whole corridor experience, to the point where I think ultimately my goal for doing these interviews is to make the playlist a little bit like that, like going down that corridor and you stop off and talk to amazing people like yourself. So it's absolutely incredible to hear that whole experience. And I suppose moving on to the Scooby Doo side of Hanna-Barbera, as we've mentioned a couple of times, you were kind enough to send over some of those amazing layouts, which I can put up on the screen, as applicable during this next part of the conversation. But obviously, the Scooby Doo is one of our favorite Hanna-Barbera shows of all time. So I'm curious to know, before working on, I suppose, your first Scooby Doo project, how familiar were you with the franchise?
Oh, as a child, I'd seen them. as I had with the Flintstones, and they were, maybe I was 10, 11 years old when, maybe 12 even, but when they started airing, and I had younger sisters too who would tune in and watch, and we would watch them. So everybody knew who Scooby Doo was. Yeah, we all knew who they were. Uh, my criticism of Scooby Doo, it's the same story over and over and over again. It's always they they think it's a haunted house, but it's really an old geezer who's trying to scare everybody away. Who's staging it. That's pretty much the plot of a Scooby Doo, and they redo it over and over again, because they can't end the show that ghosts are real, or that a vampire is real, or a mummy is alive. It's always something strange. Maybe they did one that was swamp gas once, but usually it's a geezer who's trying to chase people away because he wants the castle to himself or something like that. But anyway, yeah, I was definitely familiar with the show, the series.
Oh, that's crazy. Like Scooby, I guess there's a lot of time where it rarely strays from the formula. I think the first instance of like real paranormal things was in the 80s, and then when you consider that it came out in 1969, there was so many years where it was all just that formula, and then it
Yeah.
went back to that formula for the longest time as well. So it rarely did much to break the mold. I guess it had a formula, people seemed to enjoy it, and so it kind of ran with it until it felt like it could be, or maybe needed to be, a bit more experimental. So it's definitely a very interesting one to dissect. And I suppose because you're quite familiar with the Scooby-Doo formula, the locations that they go to, and even the members of Mystery Inc., was there any particular character or setting that was Scooby-Doo that you're excited to work on when working on Scooby-Doo?
Well, it gave me an opportunity, doing my layouts, to use like these haunted mansions, or it gave me an opportunity to try to make those art direction wise interesting. um I tried to get character into my backgrounds, and so I liked organic drawing, and what that means is I did not enjoy tracing model sheets. I didn't enjoy just doing that. I always wanted custom things. Now they wanted the model sheet pose of Daphne, or something. Uh so I liked doing the organic acting, when I could put it in. And like I say, the thing was, you had a big volume to produce when you did Scooby Doo, as with any Hanna-Barbera TV show. But I liked when I could help come up with the way something looked, like a castle, or a haunted mansion. And it got to a point too where, well, they didn't give us a design for this. And sometimes I would go to Bob Singer, and he would say, I'd say, Bob, do you have a design for this vehicle yet? He'd say, I don't have that yet, because they were running behind, and they were doing 10 shows at once, and so he would say to me, well, do you want to take a crack at it and then show us what you come up with? And I remember doing a Zeppelin once for some show. I don't remember which show, but it had to be a bad guy's Zeppelin or blimp. And I designed it, did what I thought was right. And I took it down to Bob Singer, and he looked at it and said, yeah, he goes, we can use this. And it became the design. So I liked the crossover as a layout artist, when I could also design something. I like that.
Yeah, certainly. I think, I think you certainly get a creative sense from certainly the titles that you're listed as part of an IMDb, one of which being Scooby Doo Goes to Hollywood. Do you recall what that experience was like?
I do. I remember. I do remember doing some scenes for it, and I do remember my boss was her name was Terry Kyle, and you can look her up. She was probably credited as a layout supervisor, and then her father worked at Hanna-Barbera. His name was Bill Kyle, and he was the head of the animation department. So, but Terry had come into the business and worked, and Terry's then husband was also really the head of the soup. He was the head of the layout department. His name was Don Morgan, incredibly talented layout artist. And they would put me on something like that because they thought I was delivering more art direction and they wanted more design into the stuff. I do remember one time though designing a whole Scooby, and characters were supposedly walking down a red carpet, and they wanted all these characters in the background, and I drew them, and I put in more design into those characters, sort of probably influenced by some of the UPA that I loved. And I remember that Terry handed the whole layout over to another artist who was a guy named Gary Hoffman. You might find his name on that credit, late Gary Hoffman. But he redid all my characters to make them more Scooby. And I kind of kicked myself that I didn't get to finish that one. But I don't remember much else about Scooby Go to Hollywood, but I do remember working on it. So, and I remember my boss being Terry and that one incident happening. So usually I was a guy fixing other people's work. In that case, somebody fixed my work, but I do remember that.
Oh, it's just so fascinating to hear about that.
A lot of hands go into these things.
I mean, yeah, I mean, all you have to do is like look at the credits of some of these things, and there's just so much going on. It's so fascinating to be able to sit there, like to sit back from our perspective and appreciate the amount of work that goes into these projects, especially with the Goes Hollywood movie, because I think that was literally the first movie that Scooby Doo ever did. So it's really cool to hear a story about the origin of what would eventually become an annual type of event. So thank you so much for that. And there's a few that you sent over of the layouts that I don't recall being from that Hollywood movie, and IMDb only credits you as that. So do you know what other titles you may have worked on at all?
Oh my God. Well, I don't know how accurate the IMDb was, but, and you know, typically I'd be on Super Friends, or I would be on Godzilla. And if I was on Godzilla, it meant I wasn't working on Scooby Doo. I'd be working on that show. But there was always days where you know, the crew would find, okay, we finished that up, and they would put us on Scooby Doo for a week, and then we would be off Scooby Doo, you know. So we would come back to it, and I think I remember Don Morgan wanting me to do some design work on a Scooby Doo, and I remember doing some drawings, and he was very happy with them. So, but part of it was a Western town. I don't know which episode it was. Yeah, I don't know the names of them. I do remember in the late 70s, I did some of the layouts I sent over to you. It was Scooby Doo and Scrappy Doo. There was a character there, and they went to New Orleans. That's what those layouts are. They're in a cafe, and there's some kind of chef in there. So beyond that, I don't remember.
That's the thing that sparked my curiosity. The second I saw Scrappy, I was thinking to myself, hang on, I don't think a Scrappy is in Scooby-Doo Goes to Hollywood. So my mind was kind of racing, trying to think about what it was, but that is incredible. And we've asked you your favorite Hanna-Barbera related memory, and I guess kind of narrowing it down, do you have a favorite Scooby-Doo related memory at all?
Not a particular Scooby-Doo one. You know, I enjoyed talking to Iwo Takamoto about Scooby, and I liked what he said about how the show. I've watched a whole YouTube about how they came up with the whole series, and I found that to be fascinating, and it also rang so true of how I watched Bill and Joe sell a show. And there would have been Ruby Spears were involved, and Ewo. And I know that Ewo said that he talked to a dog trainer, I think, and he looked up what were all the attributes to a Great Dane, like a well-bred, prize-winning show dog, Great Dane. And he said if the ears stood up straight, he made Scooby's floppy. If the feet were parallel, he made Scooby's stick out. He said he went the opposite way, so Scooby was more of a clown. And even the name Scooby Doo, coming up with it, coming from a scat that Frank Sinatra did for the song Strangers in the Night, very much would have been that era of those guys, what they were listening to. And they all would have been familiar with that song. Also, the whole thing that when they first started coming up with the whole show, it was to try to compete and get some of the market that the animated Beatles series was getting on Saturday morning. And so they came up with the musical teenagers in a van. Okay. And then, well, what is, no conflict, no story. What is their conflict? Well, they're going to go around solving, I guess, paranormal activities and, spooky haunted house stuff. Okay, so you have that. And then somebody high up in the network says, it's too scary. Like, that's too scary of a plot. And then Joe Barbera had learned on Johnny Quest, which was their boys action adventure series, and I worked with Doug Wildey, who created that show. But Joe Barbera, during that show, had been approached by a toy manufacturer and told, why don't you give those characters a little dog and we'll make toys of that dog and sell that. And they found it to be a popular comedic relief for the Johnny Quest show. The Little Bandit was the name of that dog. A little black marking on his eyes. And so Joe Barbera had learned that dogs were popular. And so the kids in the van, let's give him a dog. So they put Scooby Doo in. And then when they got the network reaction that the show was too scary for kids, they shrugged and said, let's make it a comedy and make most of the laughs are going to land on the dog Scooby Doo. And so that's why they designed him to be kind of comedic. But that it was an evolution. It didn't happen overnight. And they got all the ingredients right, which is why Scooby Doo is even known today. And still, there's how many iterations and revamps and revivals has there been of Scooby Doo? But it all sounds very mechanical how it came together. It wasn't like someone just pining away and saying, I've got this idea and I want to do it. No, it was a bunch of creative minds and answering the need and desire of something the networks wanted. So they kept working back and forth and then they created it. So, but I don't know if that I answered your questions, but I found that to be really interesting to hear how it happened, and talking to Ewo about Scooby was interesting. His ideas, or Bob Singer's. Bob Singer did a lot of design work on Scooby Doo. He was the head of our model department when I was there.
Yeah, I think with Bob Singer, I think in that original like Scooby Doo show, he did the layouts and the background, and then, as you say, he progressed to production designer and stuff like that. I think he did loads of things in all of the old shows, so it was incredible to get his perspective as well. And as you were saying, the whole story about how Scooby Doo was created is fascinating. I really want them one day to do like a biopic or some type of almost documentary about the start of that. I think it would just be such an incredible thing, especially as you say, with just that Frank Sinatra bit becoming, one of
Yeah.
the main staples of the show is really, really incredible. And there's just so many Hanna-Barbera projects that it's kind of bizarre to imagine that they were developed, in like the 60s or so, and yet the reruns were still applicable to me watching them, in like the
Yeah.
early 2000s and beyond that. It's incredible. So were there any Hanna-Barbera shows that you watched growing up that you really, I guess, would have enjoyed working on, but kind of never really got the chance?
Uh, well, while I was there in the late 70s, they were reviving just about everything they had ever done. And so Quick Draw McDraw, I'm drawing him. But Fred and Barney I wanted to work on, but I got to work on a Fred and Barney. I like the old Bickenbach, styling and the different. I like the early designs they did, the cartoony early designs, and I when they would come through like the Flintstones, I got to work with those, and I loved going into the file drawers. And we had a woman named Edna Busick who was in charge of the files, and you could go in there, open up the files. You would pull out the original layout drawings from the 60s or even the 50s in some cases, and you could pull out the original drawings of Ed Benedict. Ed Benedict and Bickenbach were like the two designers of like the Flintstones and had the most to do with it. But you could pull out those layouts and open them up and you go, wow, these are really neat designs. And so we were supposed to reference that stuff to recreate it. And I enjoyed doing that a lot. So
Well, there was one other animation as well that I was keen to touch on, and that was The Simpsons. Now, certainly for I know, multiple people in my family, that is almost like a daily routine. The Simpsons is on at 6 o'clock precisely, which is when my sister and all her family sit down to have dinner together and watch that show. It's, to a lot of my family, just as iconic as Scooby Doo. And with that in mind, I was just wanting to ask, do you have kind of like any favorite episodes or anything that you directed in your time there?
well, I directed 85 of the Simpsons episodes, but meaningful ones to me. I mean, other people did. I like classics like that. My friend Rich Moore directed Lisa Substitute, and I love that one. My friend Jim Reardon, the Frank Grimes Show, he directed that one. David Silverman did a whole bunch of ones that I loved, but Blood Feud, where Homer mails the letter to Burns, that's hilarious. Wes Archer, Burns for Governor, those are all those shows I studied and looked at and were in some cases being made while I was there. For my own episodes, I got to work on Camp Krusty, and I loved working on that one. And I loved working on Lisa the Vegetarian with Paul McCartney, a voice in there, and Linda McCartney. The Last Exit to Springfield, that was we call that a psychedelic episode. It was sort of a groundbreaking episode in that it was so packed with worlds and flashbacks, and we broke a lot of rules and a lot of conventional filmmaking. They tell you don't do flashbacks. They take you out of the story and stuff. Don't do them. Well, we did them right. Don't do dream sequences. Don't do flashbacks. That thing is peppered with daydreams and flashbacks. So it broke all the rules, and yet in animation it all really worked really well, and everybody loves it. So The Squirt and the Whale, that was a later one, but I really enjoyed working on that one. So I love it. So
Yeah, no, they are all certainly very memorable episodes. And I know we've kind of gone into a little bit some of your memories from working on Hanna-Barbera, but what was working on The Simpsons like? Do you have any favorite memories or anything?
That was intense, and for me, I worked on it for 30 years. But I love the camaraderie of my friends and the long-term staff members that I worked with. I love the stories. Now, under animation is hard work, and there's a lot of deadlines and those pressures. And everybody wanted to do their best work, uh, but occasionally, you know, many times on The Simpsons, something was just so damn funny. You just we would all be standing around a desk looking at even a drawing and laughing. And so those are good memories to do that. So I love that.
Amazing. I love The Simpsons so much. It's like it's the type of thing where, like, when you go back to revisit like the episodes, some stuff you don't necessarily forget about, but you forget how it's timed in a way to the point where watching a whole episode again, some joke that you've heard maybe 1,000 times from rewatching it previously can just hit you in a completely different way and make
Yeah.
you laugh all over again. So that's something that I really cherish The Simpsons for. So thank you so much for all your work on that because it is genuinely like such an incredible show. And I guess moving on to, kind of more recent things and then kind of going on to the future a bit. One thing that I learned through kind of researching after the fact was that you worked directing Libby Ward's film The Audition. So what was that like?
Do you know Libby?
Yeah, because we interviewed her not too long ago because she wrote an episode of Be Cool, Scooby Doo.
Oh, for Scooby Doo?
Yeah.
You're right. Yeah, I think she did. Yeah, I love Libby, and it she I did a silent comedy that took 2 years to make. It was a backyard movie, literally, and I was lucky to get Weird Al Yankovic in the movie. And but Libby watched the movie and said, "I should have you direct this film, the audition." And so I said, "Yes, I want to have more live action experience because when you're doing animation, the best way I found to think about it was to pretend you were making a live action movie. It's just that everything happens to be drawn, but you're thinking about master shots and close ups, and you're thinking about actors performing. And when it came to designing things, think of it as the set department, think of it as the wardrobe department, because all those things people ask me, how do you direct animation? Well, it's filmmaking, so you have the same set of considerations that live action have. Not that everybody knows about that, but they seem to be more understanding. Well, there's a cinematographer, there's a set builder, there's a costumer, there's a makeup, so they understand those are little departments. And then the actors do the acting. The directors say cut, and stuff. So I found that's the good way to think of animation. However, so I had a lot of experience doing animation, but I did covet and want to do live action. So I made some live action movies. And it was really an interesting experience. And it was interesting to work with Libby, to work with somebody else, because, you can do things your own way. But when you're making, it's good to collaborate. It's good to hold different jobs. And suddenly you have an understanding from that position. Filmmaking and animation is a very collective group experience. It can be singular. You can do a film on your own. A lot of animators do. A lot of CalArts and UCLA students and people around the world, they do their own small piece. But when you get into the profession, it's more normal to have a group. But I enjoyed working with Libby and seeing how she thought. It's always good to see how do other people think, and it was a good collaboration, and it was a fun, crazy little project, and it was done very fast. And Libby's very efficient she's a very creative writer and idea person, and I love her go get 'em attitude about things. So it's one one of the things I love about Libby Ward.
Yeah, it was just so amazing how I was convinced I'd seen something wrong or read something wrong, and the fact that there was a project that's quite different to a lot of Scooby things. And then I was like, oh, surely that's not the same person. But then looking, it's incredible how like two people that worked on very different versions of Scooby then collaborated on this project. So it was absolutely fascinating to see. So I guess kind of getting forward to the present day and the future, is there anything that you're kind of working on at the moment or upcoming that you can talk about at all?
Totally. I work on a TV show now called Housebroken. And maybe in the UK you haven't seen it yet, but it's on, I think it's on Hulu. We've aired 13 episodes so far. It's all about dogs and cats and pets and their family therapy. And it's on Fox. It's the same animation domination world that The Simpsons and Family Guy is in. And one of one of the people that really hired me, well, I'm working for Bento Box. I'm a consultant now. I was the supervising director for season 1, but so I was with them when they started the show. But one of the creators is Jen Crittenden, and you'll find her name on a number of Simpsons episodes. And she and her partner Gabrielle Allen, they are a writing team who've worked all through Hollywood, and Jen particularly has worked on Everybody Loves Raymond and Seinfeld, and they worked on Veep, a very popular show. They've won Emmys together. They created Housebroken along with Clea Duvall, a very talented actor, and Sharon Horgan is one of the producers, very talented actor. And it's a show about cats and dogs. So in a funny way, that Scooby world tied in, that I was suddenly drawing dogs again, and comedic dogs. And I mentioned Scooby Doo to Gabby, and Gabby Allen and Jen are younger than me, but they all love Scooby Doo. And it's a sophisticated show. I have some of the drawing. These are some of my early drawings for Housebroken. And this is a poodle. These are my early drawings.
Oh, wow.
But she's voiced by the actress Lisa Kudrow from Friends.
Oh.
If you know the Friends cast. But she's sort of the head therapist. And the idea is that her owner used to have group therapy in the house, and the animals learned how to do it. So they do it themselves. But they go out and have all these crazy wild adventures. If you want to think of her having a husband or partner, it's this guy. And this is an early rough drawing. It's off model, but he's a Saint Bernard named Chief. Here he's trying to take a pee. But again, I wasn't on the show too long before you can see I've even doing it on the old paper, and I was doing these drawings. But this is Chief and Honey, you know.
Oh, wow.
And then here's a funny drawing of that. You might have seen something like this on Scooby Doo, but it's just a funny pose. It didn't make it into the final either, but he gets a trash lid stuck around his neck, and a plunger and a broomstick. But that, it's just a funny looking pose. There's a lot of different animals. Now, I'll show you too the way I work today. Same way I would have worked on Scooby. If you're working on an idea, is to thumbnail it out, sketch it out. Here you see Chief running along up at the top, and he jumps and he lands in a puddle. This was the first shot, just a wide shot. Then you cut to this, he lands in the puddle. I suggested a joke which made it in, which is cut to some dogs getting splattered with mud. And then I'm showing how Chief could roll around in the mud. And then then he shakes it off. Just, the idea too of all of this is that just watching a dog be a dog is a fun thing. That in itself is a fun thing. These are also like exploratory sketches, like of Honey running, and you can see I'm in an animation way. I'm kind of breaking down the forms and the perspective of her running. Animators, when we work, especially when you worked at Hanna-Barbera on something like Scooby, we work with gesture poses. These aren't labored slow drawings. That's practically, you write the drawing out. I'm trying to analyze how a dog would run. But those are the kind, and the other thing similar with Scooby was expressions. It's a dog, but look at the expressions I get. And that would have been like a Scooby kind of thing, a similarity. So, and then here's my very, very early, these are very early drawings. And I'm just trying to warm up to the characters. And a good way to do that is just sit down and start drawing them in different expressions and forms. And, I would have worked the same way. When you look at the rough layout drawings, that's what those are. They were cleaned up. I cleaned them up and handed the cleanups in, but I ended up keeping the roughs. But like, this was just a situation of, that's a Honey and another little dog named Elsa playing tug of war with Chief. Now he's so heavy that with all their might, they can't even budge him. I watched that happen in my house. We had a black lab, Zoe, and a contractor next door was bringing his dog, who was a big heavy dog, sweet as could be. And I remember those two loved to play together. I remember they would play tug of war. All he did was sit down, and Zoe would just tug and tug and tug, and he just sat there without doing anything. And so that comedy drawing, this little, is just based on an observed thing I had happen in my backyard. So, but anyway, there you go. So people can check out Housebroken. It's one word. You can look it up online and research it, and then there's 13 episodes out there, and we're just finishing up now 19. Oh, let's see, there's 13 out, so we're finishing up 17 more episodes, which are going to be coming out during the course of the year. I think we're going to have an episode or two by the end of this month in March. So it's a comedy, and it's more adult than Scooby, and the quality of the animation is beautiful. A lot of love has gone into this. A lot of sweat and love, and Fox is very proud of it, and we're all very proud of the show. So, but that's what I'm working on currently. So.
That's amazing. I'll definitely be sure to look into where that's distributing in the UK, because I know there's some stuff that we don't have here, like HBO Max. There's certain channels that we don't normally get, but definitely I'll be sure to do that, because it just sounds absolutely amazing, and I'm absolutely a dog lover, so that definitely seems like something that I think a lot of people watching this will be interested in. And I guess equal to that, something else that people watching this will be very interested in is the work that you go on to do in the future as well. So is there an ideal place to kind of direct people that can keep up with your work at all?
It's these days I spend a lot of time drawing and painting, and as I get older, I'm going to be a painter. And so Instagram, I have an Instagram, but you don't necessarily see cartoon or animation. I'm thinking of starting another Instagram, and maybe it'll be Mark Kirkland Animation, and all the animation will go there. Right now, I just have Mark Kirkland. It's called Mark K 1914, and you'll see a lot of still lifes or landscapes or figure drawing, and that's kind of what I do now. Whether I don't know what I do, I kick around ideas for my own characters. I do think about that, and we'll have to revisit if I have something. So, or checking in with me, and I might have something then. But
Yeah,
that's what I'm doing. So I
yeah,
still love to
definitely.
draw. That's the funny thing. I still love to draw. We're without a dog now. We're, in the recent times, our dogs got old, and they've gone to doggy heaven. So my wife and I are going to do a little bit of traveling, but we're really looking forward to getting our own dogs because they provide us with so much fun and amusement, and they are characters. So I can see why dogs are popular in animation, and I can see why people love their dogs. So
They're amazing. They are amazing. I think about like growing up in a household where when I was a kid, we always grew up with like two to three dogs. So they're just such amazing creatures, amazing companions. So there is definitely that reason why they resonate with so many people, 100%. So I guess that's all of the questions that we had down for you today. I guess I just want to thank you so much for joining and all the stories you've told and all the time you've given us, because you've been incredibly generous with both of those aspects of things. So thank you so much for that.
happy, and thank you for your enthusiasm and finding me. And yeah, check out Housebroken.
Mhm.
I think people, you know, it's a more adult Scooby in a way. The adult themed problems, but they're crazy. They're funny. They're crazy funny. So thank you so much.
Yeah,
That's
no, not
great.
at all.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. And to kind of wrap up the video a bit, I'll thank everyone for watching this, because every week we get like so many of the same people and new people joining. So it's amazing to see everyone keeping up with the series, and like the whole support of the community building is absolutely incredible. So thank you so much for watching. And if you do want to see more, then please like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.